Welcome to the Wild Remedies podcast. I'm your host, Krysta, and I'm here to bring you captivating stories from some of the most fascinating people I've connected with on my own journey of physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. So sit back, relax, and get ready to be inspired.
Hi, I'm Maddie. Let me tell you a quick story of how I'm supporting my PCOS with Wild Remedies Spiced Chocolate Magic Latte. First of all, I'm a registered holistic nutritionist, so you know I'm investing in finding long-term, sustainable approaches to wellness. Living with PCOS, when things are feeling a little out of balance, it's common for me to wake up groggy, have blood sugar crashes throughout the day, or become totally overwhelmed by daily stressors. My morning coffee was causing blood sugar spikes, anxiety, and tummy trouble, so I swapped it for Wild Remedies Spiced Chocolate Magic Latte about a year ago, and believe me when I tell you that the change has been insane. Each sachet has 3 servings of wild Siberian chaga, a powerful antioxidant-rich adaptogenic mushroom that helps to fight inflammation and fatigue and regulate the immune system. It tastes like a creamy hot chocolate with just a hint of spice, and it keeps my stomach calm. Since swapping, I feel more clarity and calm throughout the day, and my morning magic latte helps to set clear intentions for the rest of my day. I save 15% on my monthly subscription at wildremediesshop.com, and at $2.50 per serving, it's saving me a ton on Starbucks runs and supplement orders. Check out the links and promos in the show notes to get your own. Your adrenals will thank you.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Wild Remedies podcast. I am just in deep contemplation about the conversation that I just had with Stephen Jenkinson, who I'm about to introduce you all to. I do my intros after I've finished recording the episode. So yeah, I'm just marinating in it. I was a little nervous talking to him. I've been following Stephen's work for a few years now, and his work came to me during a very difficult period of my time, or of my life, very difficult period of my life, which I explain in this episode. And I feel like his work rearranged my DNA. I became a different person after I listened to his books. If you decide to dive into Stephen's work after this, I highly recommend listening to him on Audible. You'll see his voice is just beautiful. He's also a musician, and he speaks in poems. His work is just absolutely mind-blowing, and he speaks of such deep, deep, potent topics. So today we're talking about death, and in particular, I reference his book called Die Wise, which I feel is a must read for everyone. So we're having a conversation about something that is going to happen to all of us. And we live in a culture that Stephen describes as death phobic. So we push death away. We don't want to see it. We don't know what to do when death comes knocking, and we outsource it. We outsource it to medical institutions, to other people, because we haven't been modeled what to do during the dying time. And it's interesting because this is something that happens to all of us, and it is part of the process, similar to birth. So I feel like I fumbled through, my questions were a little fumbly in this episode because I had an outline for how I wanted to take this conversation, but his words are so profound. So it's like he finishes, a thought, and it's so profound that I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know where to go next. So just bear with me through this episode. He is amazing, and just let his words just penetrate your being because it's so profound. I also recommend another one of his books, which is called Come of Age, The Case for Elderhood in a Time of Trouble. That also completely changed my life, and I highly, highly recommend. Just a little background of Stephen. He is an activist, a teacher, an author, and a farmer. He's the founder of the Orphan Wisdom School in Tramore, Canada, out in Ontario, and he is the author of 4 books. So there's Die Wise, which is an award-winning book about grief and dying and the great love of life. Then he wrote Come of Age, the case of for elderhood in a time of trouble. And most recently, he published A Generation's Worth, which was paired with a 4-part live stream speaking series presented in winter 2022. So let's just get into this episode. There is so much wisdom here, and I really hope you guys enjoy. So first of all, I would just really first I'd love to say that I'm really honored to be chatting with you today. I've been following your work for a few years now, and it came into my life at a very pivotal time for me, and it allowed for a lot of awakening and a lot of healing for me. I had just lost my first grandparent. I'm still blessed to have most of the grandparents in my life. And it was the first time that I was, I guess, faced with a death in the family that was quite close and personal. And I had also gone through a very difficult breakup. And the first book that I had read, actually listened to, was Die Wise, which to me is just hours and hours of beautiful, heartbreaking poetry. But the medicine in there, I think, is so potent, and it is so needed, especially for this time right now. So first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for that work, because it's absolutely beautiful.
You're very kind. You're very welcome too. The blessing of the whole arrangement is, if I happen to do something and it turns out to be useful, and then you happen to find it in a timely way, well, life may not get any better than that.
I agree. And for everyone listening today, the context of this conversation is we're going to be talking about something that will happen to all of us, right? Or like how you put it in the book, for all of us who will fail to live forever. Mm-hmm. And for myself, I've spent a lot of time ever since I was a little girl contemplating death. For some reason, I don't know why. Mm-hmm. I've just been a little bit more spiritually inclined, I think. But there's a lot of people in our society who I think don't contemplate death, or they're really afraid to. And, I love how you explain the reasons of maybe why this is in your book. But before we get into all of that, if you could, I would love for you to explain to everybody your background, as the angel of death, as you explain in your book.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if anybody can really, quote, explain their backgrounds, unquote, but because that's trying to make sense of it, But I can tell you that through a sequence of mostly accidents and strange timings, I was introduced to the idea that there's such a thing as people who take care of people who are dying. And I know that sounds naive, but I'm going back, 20 years ago or something like that. And it was not front page news at the time. Far from it, actually. So I forgive myself for being fairly naive on the whole escapade at the time. But there was a woman who knew the work quite well and knew me. And she was adamant that somehow I had a kind of predisposition and a certain capacity that the work somehow required or would benefit from. I had no idea what that meant. But I listened to her. And I think initially I started with working with a group of men who'd recently had someone in their lives who had died, or who was dying at the time, kind of imminently. And after about the third session, where none of us knew what we were doing in this group, least of all me, but somewhere in there, it became apparent to me that what they all had in common as a strong suit was anger. They were very good at being angry, and it tended to unnerve the people around them, as it's understandable. But it was a kind of cover story as well. I mean, let's be clear. There's such a thing as anger is needed at times, and comes in very handy indeed. And they were very good at it, but they left a certain number of things behind in pursuit of that expertise. And the chief among them was sadness. So they were just, as it turned out, just no good at being sad. And so one of them dubbed our meeting Sad School. And it was supposed to, I think, last 6 weeks or something. And at their insistence, in some form or another, it lasted 18 months or thereabouts. And somewhere during the course of that group, I came to the attention of the hospital. I mean, in the best way that can be meant. And they approached me with some kind of full-time thing, and I agreed to do it. And on a real, let's see what happens, because I'm not really organizational material. Not then, not now, but I agreed to give it a shot. And lo and behold, the woman who knew me well was absolutely right. And the first palliative care patient I went to see in their home turned out to be a physician. Turned out, in fact, to be a palliative care physician. Turned out that his early work produced or contributed to the program that sent me to his door, for crying. I mean, how could you ever begin a career that way? But that's exactly what happened. And I walked into his room, and he was surrounded by nameplates from all the offices that he'd ever had during the course of his medical career. So it's his name, 60 different ways. And I sat down across from him, and I knew what to do. And I don't mean that in any arrogant fashion, but there's no sense in pretending. And I knew what I was there to do, and I had a sense of how to do it. I still had to learn the ropes. I still had to learn the machinery, the medical machinery and all of the rest. But in terms of introducing people to the imminence and the legitimacy and the necessity of their death, that was available to me almost immediately. All I had to do really was translate what that meant into a language that was accessible to other people. And that was the lion's share of my work, as it turned out. And I think that's where DieWise came from. Me attempting to translate instinct and sorrow and grief and despair and aversion and denial, all of those things, into a language where dying people could recognize they're dying in it, instead of look in vain for the details and the particulars, the realities of their dying, because that's the way most people spoke to them, in code, in euphemism. And when people speak to you in euphemism, your life tends to disappear without a trace very early on in the encounter. It's like people pretending they're speaking to you, but they're speaking a language they know you can't understand. But they're kind of obliging you to go along with it. That's what death speak is, or was, when I was working in the death trade. And everything I hear, everything I see tells me it's very likely that things are worse now than when I started the work 15, 18, or 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for that explanation. And one of the things that I find so powerful about the work that you've done in this book is, driving home the fact that we are living in what you describe as a death phobic culture. And so I would really love for you to explain that concept to the audience.
Okay. Well, I recall very frequently in my early months, first couple of years in the death trade, people inside the trade and out were unanimous almost on the matter of what was most wrong with how we did our dying in this culture, the dominant culture of North America. And the unanimity gathered around the following point: we just don't talk about death. I tell you, that's not what I saw. That's not what I heard. That's not what I learned. I don't think it was ever really true. I mean, it sounds good when you shoot from the hip and say, well, nobody talks about it. But people are talking about it like crazy. And I think to a certain degree always have. That was never the problem. The problem was, what were we saying when we did talk about it? What kind of language we're using, as I said a minute ago? What kind of things do we find a way not to say? I'll give you an example that comes from the work I did. You may remember the story from the book. So I phone up, I'm on my way over to somebody's house. I phone to make sure that they remember the appointment and so on. And the woman says, oh, yes, she says, my son is looking forward to meeting you. Now, he was about 17, 18, and his father was dying upstairs. That circumstance, and he was an only child. That circumstance alone means, without question, that she was exaggerating at best, or more than likely lying about him looking forward to talking to me. And it turns out I was right. Of course, he wasn't looking forward to talking to me. So I was on notice that we were kind of speaking in smoke signals in some crazy way. And then towards the end of it, she said, so just so we understand each other, when you're here, you're not going to use the D word, right? Quote, that's what she said. Now, I actually looked at the phone as if I was in a kind of sitcom, as I couldn't believe my ears. No one had ever said it that nakedly before. Don't use the D word. And rather than, argue or challenge her, I said, didn't you just tell me that your son goes in to see his father every day before he goes away for school and then comes home in the evening and checks in with his dad? His father's basically non-responsive at this point. So he's basically drooling on his pillow, if you will, not to be overly dramatic about it, but it wasn't uncommon. And I said, so if I don't use the D word in talking with your son, what secret am I helping you keep? So you see why I tell you the story. It's a true story for one. And the woman meant well, clearly. Well, I'm going to say that she meant well. But she was not proceeding very well, not at all. The notion that if you don't use the word death or die, that somehow there's no dying in the house, or there's no dying that needs to trouble anybody, or nothing really needs to be said. We just have somebody who's interestingly sick upstairs. It makes your jaw drop when you start to do the math on what the implications are of having something happen in the house and forbidding any kind of direct language that would make that whole event real and tangible and something that people can respond to, not just now, not just during the time of the dying, but especially in the months and the years after the death, because you're setting the stage now for all kinds of aversion, all kinds of doublespeak, all kinds of, hand jive and a gross inability to remember deeply, accurately, or in any kind of mythic or poetic way. And all you're left with is the facts, the day of the death, the cause of the death, almost like a death certificate instead of a memory and a life.
Yeah, I know. We don't have conversations about death and in this culture, and until it comes knocking, we have no experience. We have, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like in our culture, we're essentially outsourcing the death process because it has been stripped from our culture in a way. Like when we look at indigenous cultures, death was part of everyday life, same as birth. And now we've completely medicalized it and we've hidden it. And I really loved one of the examples from the book when you talk about how a hospital is built and the morgue being in the basement, and that's by design, right? It's like to hide the death, to put it away. Nobody wants to see this. This is unseemly. And it's so sad that we just don't have, the other book that I really admire of yours is, about elderhood. And we seem to have lost that connection throughout time, where we've had the advice of those in our lineage to, have the experience of what to do during the dying time.
Yeah.
I was really fortunate to be there to witness my grandfather's passing when he left a couple of years ago. But it was, I think a little bit, I mean, it should be awkward for everybody in a sense, where it's like, okay, this is happening and nobody here really knows what to do about it. But it was humbling in so many ways. And I was so glad that I was there to be able to experience it. And it's a shame that so many people are afraid to confront it.
Well, honestly, I think the word confront might be a little unnecessarily strong, even oppositional, and the truth of the matter is, do everything you can to, quote, confront death, but I promise you death wins. So if you imagine it as some kind of conflict or some kind of engagement that has some sort of aggressive or willful aspect to it, this is really a misapprehension of what's called for. I'd recommend something closer to this. I think death is a deity. You mentioned, quote unquote, indigenous cultures. I don't think there's any doubt of the capacity of cultures that are at home in their home places, that have a degree of cultural continuity that missionizing and westernizing and all the rest, and now globalizing, hasn't completely overwhelmed. And part of their capacity has to do with this engagement with dying as if dying belongs. It's not the end of belonging. It's not the corruption of belonging. It's one of the conditions of belonging. Belonging to life, belonging to the world, belonging to the body you're entrusted with, belonging to each other. And death belongs at least as much as you do. Your dying was here certainly from when you got here, which is to say, it was always true that you were going to die. It was always true. The knowledge about where and when is mercifully unclear. I mean, what would you do with the information? It would make you absolutely bonkers. And the closer it got, the worse it would get. But the good news is, and it really genuinely is good news, is that you get to know all you need to know so that your attention can be devoted to the facts. And you're spared all of the information that would absolutely throw you sideways. What an amazing architecture it is. You know you're going to die. How much more do you need to know? What will make it clearer? What will translate into you? I'm not a fan of the notion of seizing the day and all this kind of thing, but what better preparation is there for you to look out the window and go, wow, still here? And then translate the wonder of that into how you conduct yourself. I mean, what else do you need, man? And yet, I'm saying this as if it's the most self-evident thing there is. And there's a reason I'm saying it, because the information, such as it is, or the kind of moral stance vis-a-vis life that's available to us, is completely lost on us, generally speaking. And whenever the subject comes up, the response that I see much more often than not is people palming it away with some kind of sort of verbal gesture, a kind of euphemism, like, oh, everybody's dying all the time. I mean, that's my favorite dismissal. Everybody's dying all the time, is it? So it's no big deal then? let me check in with you when you got a terminal diagnosis and let's see if it's no big deal. I mean, I'm saying that very confrontationally, and I mean it to sound that way because, frankly, those of us who are part of the most materially prosperous culture that the world has ever seen have some kind of responsibility to obey the limits and the endings that are entrusted to us. And we're not doing a very good job. And one of the ways we betray what's entrusted to us is making out as if we're all dying all the time. So there's no particular reality to dying. There's no particular, it's not that big a thing, that sort of stuff. And that puts my teeth on edge, to be honest, because of how dismissive it is and how it sets aside most of life and allows you to cling to the part of life that you're most fond of or that benefits you the most. We should really be able to do a better job of being alive than we do. And knowing that you're going to die is one way to do it.
Yeah, I agree so much with that. I think living an unfulfilled life is cause for suffering during the death process,
Yes, and
right?
not just
Like
your
if
suffering.
you have,
Your unfulfilled life
mhm,
has enormous consequences for the people around you.
absolutely,
And it's not clear to me that
absolutely.
we have the right to inflict our unwillingness to live deeply upon others and call that a memory.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's almost like a responsibility that we all have, right? There's a saying now about like living your best life, which I
Right.
don't particularly love. But truly, like if you are committed to living in a way that brings light to this world, I think by the end of that life, you can, feel much more at ease during that process. I'm sure you've had a lot of experience. What I've noticed about the stories in your book, is you're witnessing a lot of like this, you kind of describe it as like this grinding terror that a
Yeah.
lot of people experience
Yes.
during their passing, which is very sad. And that's what people are really terrified of. And I'd love for you to explain why you think that is, like why we are in that state now. How did we get here?
Well, I have a view on the subject. I don't know how complete the answer will be, but I can contribute at least. And I think this is one of the elements. If I ask you what happens when you die, what happens immediately after, and what becomes of you, let's be frank, let's be honest now, and admit the distinct possibility that you're likely to freeze, or you're likely to become flustered, or you're likely to have recourse to kind of banal truisms, or you're going to start talking about what you believe, as if the disposition of you after you die is a consequence of your own belief system, as if your own belief system comes from and is informed by the realities of your dying, which it isn't. In your bones, that's not where it comes from. I can tell you this. When I worked in the death trade, interviewers would ask me very frequently whether I found that people who came to their dying time with a kind of religious or spiritual orientation to life somehow magically did better, or as they often said, had better outcomes. Did I think so? And my answer was always some version of the same thing. No. And they were dumbfounded. How could it not provide or generate a better dying. I said, oh, that's easy. The belief, the convictions, all of that stuff that they have, they didn't develop that from learning about dying while they were learning about dying. They developed that stuff and absorbed it and took it upon themselves in large measure as a defense against hurt, against pain, against sorrow and unhappiness, against disappointment, against a sense of meaninglessness or purposelessness, and you guessed it, against dying. So if you develop a kind of quote unquote spirituality that's not informed by the realities of your dying, then your dying comes on. Something's got to give, doesn't it? And either your dying is going to go, okay, you got me. Your beliefs are so tight, so cool, and so clear that I've got nothing to do and I got nothing to say. You win. Have a nice next 36 hours or, whatever it is. Or you say to death, God, I did everything I could to keep you at bay. And here you are at the time I'm least able to keep you away. Not very spiritual.
No, well, and I'm actually really surprised by that statistic. Like I would think that having a spiritual practice would make, the death process maybe a little more comfortable for people who are going through that. I'd love for you to explain. You mentioned death being a deity. Can you explain that a little bit more?
I don't know if I can explain it, but I can breathe on the coals of the idea a little bit. Well, simply if we say the word deity, if we say the word holy or sacred, if we say the word God, one of two things is likely to happen. You get instant buy-in with the person you're talking about, uncritical and automatic and immediate high-fiving you, so to speak. Or you get the rolling of the eyes in one way or another. So there's our great poverty, no? That when it comes to talking about, let's just call it the rest of the story, the part of the story that doesn't present itself so readily during the course of our awakened lives. It's dumbfounding to me. It's like having nothing to say about that portion of your life in which you're asleep, in which you're dreaming and sometimes thrashing and sometimes sleepless, even still. But there's nothing to say about it. There's no language. There's no acknowledgement that there's any reality called the lights are off and the sun is down. Well, that's what it's like to deny the presence of something that hasn't happened yet, but is certainly present nonetheless. And is that not a bad job description for God? Hasn't happened yet, not in its totality, but certainly is there. And because of that has a kind of, even the absence of God has a consequence. So when I say dying is a deity, I mean that you can develop all the 5-stage strategies you want for contending with it, for thinking that you prevail, even if acceptance is your idea of prevailing. You can do all that stuff, but it puts an enormous amount of emphasis upon you and almost no emphasis at all upon the dying. And when dying comes around, don't you think it's a time for you to learn dying instead of learning what you can do to not die yet one more time? So by deity, I mean it's a kind of strange, uncommon, persistent, powerful presence that's not really interested in our opinions. I mean, it's not out to get us. Or I guess I would say the deity called death means you no harm. It means you, though. Of that you can be sure.
There's so much to contemplate there. That's really beautiful. You know, it sounds like there's a lot that we can learn during the dying process. What experiences have you had sitting with people? Like, are there folks that you've witnessed that you feel have experienced transformation during their dying time?
I'm not sure what. Can you say a little bit more what you mean by the word transformation?
I think what I mean is, so this process being like something that we can learn from. You know, is there anything sort of like spiritual or transformative, or is there an aspect that you have noticed in the dying time that you feel is purposeful in our life as an ending that creates, yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but essentially like what do you feel we're supposed to learn during the dying process?
Okay. Not easy to answer a question, is it?
No.
No. Okay. Well, the first thing I'd say to you is my answer to all of that stuff is not inevitably no. Do I think that dying is a time of, profound reorientation to life? Not necessarily, no. Well, do I think it's a time when people can trade in their old understanding for something completely renovated by a change? My answer is not necessarily, no. But you've said it's a deity and it's so powerful. How can it not have its way with us? Oh, I didn't say it won't have its way with us. I just didn't say that we would be convinced while it does. You know, one of the great problems that Anglo-North Americans have, and we have quite a few, but one of them is our belief that we get a vote in everything that matters, that we're an agent in everything that happens, that we get to choose, that we're autonomous, freestanding sovereign beings. I could go on and on and on. And I have to tell you that there's no purchase for that kind of stuff when you're dying. None whatsoever. It doesn't mean that North Americans don't take or attempt to take their dying into their own hands and turn it into another form of self-expression, because they do every day. That's one of the things that, all the reemergence of the hallucinogens in the dying time means. That's what the advocacy for and the legalization of and the practice of what used to be called euthanasia means. It's people accustomed to being in charge, remaining in charge, but it's a complete illusion. You're not in charge of your dying. No matter how many advanced directives, living wills that you might fill out, you're not the boss. It's not your death. You see, it's death, which has been entrusted to you, and soon enough will be taken from you. That's what it is. And in that sense, man, does it ever resemble life? It was never your life. It was a little piece of life that was entrusted to you for a while, in hopes, maybe, that things could be better on the back end than they were on the front end. That one of the signs that you were here and that indeed that you were alive is that your little corner of the world is a little better off because you came to your senses, because you're willing to know and understand these things and learn them, because you're willing to devote at least a portion of your life to translating what that means and doing so in the presence of other people, so that when other people are, mournful and remorseful by virtue of having no living example of what it means to see one human being undertake the kind of work I've been describing to you, you become that one human being, that one example that they might have been looking for or not looking for. And you change their lives as a consequence of you taking on the work that's been entrusted to you. And you may never know that, and you probably won't. But it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It does mean that there's an awful lot riding on what's been entrusted to you. An awful lot.
That's beautiful. And I think, that kind of segues into, your other book, when you're talking about being a good elder, right? That kind of encompasses that. I just wanted to circle back to what you just mentioned about the assisted dying. And this seems to be, it's a bit of a hot issue right now with this MAID program that, we're seeing in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to know what your opinion on assisted dying is.
Oh, honestly, I don't have an opinion about it. I mean, nobody cares what I feel about it, what my prejudices might be about it. I don't even care what my prejudices are. On the other hand, I can wonder about the consequences of it without having to have a pro or con opinion. I mean, I can certainly leave that to others because there's lots of people who are, more than ready to exercise their vote on the matter. But I understand it. You got to remember now, I worked in the death trade at a time when assisted death was murder. It was against the criminal code. You could be charged. And yet, what we used to call in the trade passive euthanasia happened all the time. People did it all the time because they were in a terrible quandary, weren't they? Not only the physicians, but the families and the patients as well. Everybody was in a terrible place. How so? Well, they had the technology that allowed them to prolong the lives of dying people. But nobody ever said the reality. The reality was they were prolonging the death of dying people too. Not only, but certainly they were doing that. And then there comes a time at which the prolongation of death itself has to stop. But how do you stop it? And the only way you stop it now, because the life of the patient depends on you continuing these measures, the only way you can stop it is to stop the patient's life. That's the position you've worked yourself into. That's the corner that you're in now. And I wonder, as this goes on, do you see any fundamental change in how the culture understands its death phobia? Because I'm going to propose to you that the legalization of euthanasia by a death phobic culture prolongs the death phobia. It doesn't change it, doesn't challenge it, doesn't oblige the culture to rethink its position on all these matters. It just says, right now, fix that one, didn't we? We put the choice back where it belongs, didn't we? As if people have the capacity to make this kind of choice. As if it's a, quote, informed choice. Why do you suppose now that things are sliding sideways? And it turns out now, as you knew it was going to happen, that euthanasia, or MAID, to use the term that's used today, that MAID turns out not to be just for people with a terminal diagnosis, not anymore, for people with intractable suffering, regardless of whether they're at the end of their lives or not. Yep, it's available to them now. And a lot of other subsets of sorrow. So there used to be, as I understood it, a kind of a committee that had to decide whether or not you who were applying for inclusion into the program were depressed, for example. If you're depressed, you're disqualified. Why is that? Well, because depressed people want to die because they're depressed, not because they're dying anyway. But wait, they're dying in a death-phobic culture. Or they're not dying in a death-phobic culture, but they will. What do you suppose that does to people? Well, I was there. I saw it every day. I know what the answer to that question is. See, it's the reason that I took upon myself the activism that I did. Because people are not capable of sorting this stuff out, because it's a culture level problem. It's not an individual belief problem. It's a problem at the level of the gross malfunction of the culture. You could even call it the gross malpractice of the culture. So here we are on the other side of having legalized MAID. And how death phobic do you think we are now? How death literate do you think we are now? How grief literate do you find us being now? Why are we even talking about this stuff now that we've got the magic pill or the magic bullet or the magic way where the suffering doesn't have to be anymore? How are we doing now? See, so my point is, lo and behold, we got our wish. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised that by some kind of metrics that I can't anticipate, we'll find in 5 or 10 years that we're worse off than we were.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really frightening concept. And it's interesting because I've experienced it firsthand. So the story that I told earlier about my grandfather, he actually opted for the assisted suicide. And it was in palliative care. So we were in the hospice. And when he was first told that he was going to die, that was the balm that he reached for first. My mom told me that my grandfather was so grateful or relieved, and what he had said to her was, "Aren't I so lucky? Aren't I so lucky that we have this option available?"
Yeah.
By which he was meaning to speed up the process, to get it over with. Right. And when I had asked him, I asked him, I said, Are you afraid to die, Grandpa? And he said, no, like he wasn't afraid of it. But I think that he was, right? Because he wanted to move through the process more quickly. And this was before the MAID programs. This is a couple of years ago. And the way that it was being done at that time was, it was sort of legal, but kind of under the table, and you had to sign a document. So when I watched him pass, it was very, very medicalized.
Sure it was.
A doctor came into the room and had a bunch of really, really big needles. And it was, I'm grateful that I was there to witness. And, I'm also happy that he was able to, sort of go out on his own terms. But I think it does, there are some complications there, or perhaps this option may be, it's almost like a spiritual bypass of some sort, right? Like if there are lessons to be gleaned through the dying process, might it be, a bit of an issue that we are looking to push that away? We live in a culture where anything natural, we're medicalizing everything at this point. And you talk about that a lot in your book, this ordeal of a managed death and buying more time, and what that does to the dying process as well is really a shame. And it's become a business itself, right? Like you call it the death trade, which is really fascinating. Do you want to explain that a little bit? Just like the concept of the death trade and what you've seen happen over the years?
Well, it's not much of a concept, really. I just looked out one day early on in my career, I guess you would call it, and it occurred to me that the word death or dying, it just, it's nowhere to be found. And the truth of the matter was, there's only one thing that all the people that we worked with as, quote, clients, unquote, had in common. One thing. Well, okay, two things. One, they were dying. Two, they were dying in a death-phobic culture. And yet there was no acknowledgement of culture, and there was very little acknowledgement of what terminal means, what it should mean, what it should oblige you to, how you might want to reconsider what your life looks like and what it's for. And, people would routinely say to me, who are you to say what death should mean to people? My answer was, well, so far, nobody is. So I'll volunteer for the job until people with better expertise undertake the work. And it never happened on my watch. So I think the phrase death trade, there's nothing insulting about it. There's nothing untowards about it. It's a perfectly legitimate description of a work that is a partly career, partly employment, partly vocation, partly finger in the dike, partly doing your best under very trying circumstances, partly the opportunity to get it right finally. I mean, there's a lot of things at play. But man, if you're part of any medical system, any healthcare system, basically in any country, and you're trying to undertake this work, the more highly evolved the medical technology is, the greater will be the obstacles against surfacing the realities of dying, because the technology is devoted to keeping those things at bay, you see, just the way that the advent of hallucinogens on the ward will be employed for very similar purposes, to keep the realities of dying manageable. You used the phrase earlier, coming to I think it was your grandfather came to his death, quote, on his own terms, is the phrase you used. And, I just wonder, and I'm not trying to bust you in any way at all here, but I wonder, why is that so inherently good? Your own terms, when nothing about the terms that you come to it with come from dying. They all come from somewhere else. It strikes me as very odd calculation to imagine that coming to your death on your own terms means you somehow win. What's the upside supposed to be? I mean, your own terms instead of what?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what it is like to bypass the pain, right? People fear the pain and the suffering aspect of death.
Okay, listen, let me,
And so
sorry to jump in, but I'd just like to say that please don't mistake me as saying people shouldn't be fearing pain and all the rest. Come on now. It's a very fearsome situation. There's no doubt about it. And there's nothing of what I'm saying that favors some kind of white knuckle run where, just hold on for all you're worth and go through hell. Not in the least. I'm not a fan of suffering. I'm not advocating it. I'm not trying to preserve a circumstance in which suffering is guaranteed. I'm telling you suffering is guaranteed. And there will be a particular kind of suffering that's a consequence of all these bypasses that you're identifying and referring to. There's no doubt in my mind that this is already the case. But, apparently the magic bullet, maybe it's not the best phrase, the magic is that you get to do it your way. Well, I was there when people did it their way. And I can tell you, there wasn't much to be envied when dying becomes another couple of paragraphs in your autobiography. Dying is bigger than you. Someday, North Americans, some of us will learn that. And maybe some of us will proceed as if it's true, finally.
We have so much to learn about this right
Yeah,
now.
that's
Like
true.
yeah, yeah, we do. We have so much to learn. We're getting close to the end of our time, but I have one more question for
Okay.
you, or more of a contemplation.
All right.
It's an excerpt from your book,
Yeah.
and you say dying wise is a political act that challenges the status quo. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
It has maybe I might have said it slightly better and said something like the consequences of dying well, dying wise are political as much as they're anything else. I think the last 55 minutes is an example of what I'm referring to. Everything I've been saying has political implications. And I don't mean party politics now. I'm not talking about running for office politics. I mean the notion of whether or not we should, how we might possibly take all this medical innovation, technological innovation, and so on, and adjudicate and regulate its impact upon us, because that's not happening. The technology is the boss. The innovation is the boss. And we are all playing catch up on the consequences. And that's still happening. That's a political situation. And people who are small p politicians or capital P politicians, we all have a responsibility to recognize that the thing we think we're the beneficiaries of, we're not only beneficiaries. And we're putting a lot of things into motion that are going to have consequences for your children's generation or your grandchildren's generation, if that's the way it works out. Certainly the generation. There's no question at all that we're putting things into motion that they have no choice in, that they're going to have to live in the presence of nonetheless. So I think it's only fitting to say that the way in which you die and the recourse that you have and that you exercise in the course of your dying is nothing but politics. It's also mythic and poetic reality. It's also a psychological and a spiritual reality. It's also a cultural, village-based reality. It makes community or it breaks it, as it says in the back of the book. So there's a lot at stake. Every time somebody comes into their dying, the orbit of their dying, there's a lot at stake. And all you hear me doing here is making a plea that understanding actually shows up, that we don't wait for it to intrude into this proceedings, that it should be the proceedings.
Oh my gosh. So much. We have so much to learn.
Yeah.
So
This is
much
a
to
decent start,
contemplate
though.
here. It is. It is. And honestly, I mean, for anybody listening to this conversation, like we are just barely touching the surface here.
Correct.
And so I really, really, really appreciate you coming on today, just to start this conversation and get these ideas out into people's ears. Because I'm always going on and on about the concept of sovereignty and seeing that through to all aspects of our life. And I feel like we need to take back power in so many different ways, whether it's through, the different systems that we have, whether it be educational or medical. And this ties into it too, right? If people want to learn more, because there is so much to learn from you, how can people connect?
Oh, we have, like, who doesn't have a website? I do too. So it's called orphanwisdom.com, just like it sounds, all one word. And everything I'm doing, all the public appearances and the performances and so on, everything's listed there. There's a lot coming up in the course of this year. And the chances are as good as not that I might be coming to a town near you. So it can happen that way. And with that, I'm going to have to excuse myself because I have things I have to attend to here on the farm. But I do appreciate the invitation and the time you took to speak with me about the matters and the questions that you came up with. And thanks for the privilege of doing so.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor. Thank you again for your work.
Thank you too. Thank you for that. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much for sharing your time and energy with us today. We'd love to hear your feedback on how our podcast has impacted your life and are also open to suggestions for new and interesting topics. Please leave your comments with a quick review to help us grow this magical community of wellness warriors and light workers. Every month, we select one lucky reviewer to win our big Magick box, containing all 3 of our beautiful Magick Lattes. To connect with us further, check us out on Instagram at wild_remedies. Thank you again, and see you at the next episode.